This is the Listening Project podcast, sharing our stories to amplify our voices, a project of the RPA. We are Richmond organizers who have listened to residents who are the most harmed by some of the biggest polluters in our rich city. These are our stories.
It's just really scary to think about because we've never really lived in our lifetime have lived without fossil fuels. But fossil fuels are eventually going to run out. And if you think about it, we're literally digging up dead stuff from years and years and years ago. And it's coming back to haunt us. It's harming our lungs and the air we breathe and the water that we drink.
Lizbeth definitely brought up a point that I have thought about many a times, how scary it is to live in a world where our air is coming back to haunt us. The things underground are coming back to haunt us. And I just want to welcome everyone back to our fourth episode. My name is Danny, organizer with the Listening Project. I'm super happy to be here. And I just want to say this episode, we are going to be talking about community health, and just want to let everyone know that we are not medical professionals. We are not doctors. But we are researchers and have done a lot of research on this topic.
Hola, hola, it's Sol, la prima, la profe. Don't call me Mary. Super excited to be here again with y'all. Danny and Alfredo, welcome back. Hopefully you're tuning into all of our episodes. Today, we are really going into public health. We're going to be really talking about who is the killer. This episode's name is Silent Killer. Who is the killer and who is the victim? Who is killing and who is being killed? And what that means to our community. And this is a theme that we've heard over and over again, which is why we're dedicating our own episode just to this.
Yeah, hello everybody. Alfredo here. Very nice to be with you all again. I hope you're enjoying these episodes. Right now, also, in addition to talking about public health, we're going to be sharing some brief scientific concepts related to pollution, and we're going to be adding some resources in our description where, one, you can learn more, but two, you can also take some action. There's some lines from the Air District to complain about smells and stuff like that. Very helpful information. But okay, let's get started. We're going to open with talking about essentially how our community responded to our ask of, how has air pollution affected your health? How does air pollution affect your health? Air pollution was a big part of our responses from the survey. This was a big concern that the community had. So let's hear a couple voices. You're going to hear from Christian, Saeed, and Rio, which are all wonderful community members.
They're killing us slowly or even quickly because of their constant pollution and flaring. So that's how they directly affect our lives. They play a role in our health. And in terms of the climate crisis, they played the hugest role, especially around here. The oil refinery that refines the oil for most of the country. So that's why Chevron's so big, because a lot of the oil that's distributed throughout the country is sent here. Yeah, and then it gets distributed. So yeah, there's constant pollution, constant flarings. It's not great.
I need to just be able to walk outside and not know and know that I'm not gonna be breathing in all this pollution. And I know just living in Richmond, I've been through a few Chevron chemical spills. I got what they call this 18 money. The chemical spill when I was 2 or 3, and when I was 18, I was able to get this 18 money, but it didn't do anything for me because I still have lifelong health problems, as far as asthma and just things like that. And so I think a lot of people within our cities are faced with these lifelong health problems, and it's man, like, damn, bro, like, you know, and we have no choice because we walk outside and we breathe it in. You know, the Chevron refineries and all these, you know, these chemical spills, and it's constant. It happens even more frequently than what we know. And it's like we're breathing this stuff in, and we really just like, you know, it's like, hey, you're cattle. You know, just get out here and breathe it in, and you'll be all right in the long run, and we'll give you a little bit of money to pacify you. So I think, man, it's just so much more that we need to, we got to get rid of all this pollution and get rid of all this, you know, the negative things that we are ingesting into our bodies, man, because that's what a lot of these health problems is, you know, and that we're facing. So I think that's what it is.
Because like a lot of the people in our community, we don't have access to stuff like air purifiers, you know? So I'm just like, we had already had the doors and windows open for so long prior to being told to close them. That like, I'm like, we were probably still inhaling the same smoke.
Yeah, that is just, I mean, the sentiment has been pretty consistent from everyone we've talked to. And, you know, if you've listened to any of the previous episodes, you know, I'm from Long Beach, and we have a really similar kind of thing where when there's big catastrophic, you know, horrible events, we all talk about it. But those aren't the things that actually impact our community the most. It's the chronic illnesses that are from the long-term exposure of industry. And in our survey, 86% of folks actually said that they either have or know someone with asthma, and 22 people actually said that they have more than one chronic issue. And so what's going on here, like long term? You know, we talk about these big incidents, but what about just everyday life? What is really affecting us long term?
Absolutely. And I think that on top of the major polluter here, which is Chevron, we also need to take into account all of the other companies that are supporting Chevron in their fossil fuel operations. And that would be what actually Saeed talks about in reference to the 18 money. We're not going to go super deep into this, but essentially a lot of the class action lawsuits that actually had to do with 18 money were actually from other chemical dispensaries, almost, if you will, a chemical company. And one of them was called Gen Chem. And in the 90s, folks essentially got paid out from a chemical leak of sulfuric acid. And so a lot of people at that point, their parents applied for this money, and then it was put into an account. And at 18 years old, they actually received that money. And so Chevron's number one class action lawsuit is just the 2012 fire. But there are the perpetrators, they are the accomplices. There are other accomplices of the effects of when we live and the risks of when we live next to a refinery.
There's so much that happens, like not only because of Chevron, but like byproducts of all of the other things that have to align for fossil fuel operations to happen. You know, we need to bring in chemicals from here, we need to bring chemicals from there, and all of that, you know, before it even gets to the refinery, has an effect on our community. You know, we've known that one of the big pollutants besides the refinery here in Richmond is the railroad. And that is simply, like, even just for transportation is a big pollution problem. And so like to really understand why this is important, why this is a problem, we're going to get a little bit into the science of air pollution. Go ahead. One of the big things that we need to worry about when having these conversations is something called PM 2.5. You've probably heard of this before. The Air District talks about it all the time. This is one of the big air pollution like talking pieces. PM 2.5 or diesel PM refers to something that we call particulate matter. This matter simply are really tiny molecules that are created by things like combustion in your car's motor, in diesel trucks as they pass down the highway, in industrial processes like refining oil. And so, like, to give you something compare it to, the 2.5 is 2.5 microns, which is like 30 times smaller than the size of a average human hair. And
Say that
so
again one time, Alfredo, for the people.
30 times smaller than a strand of human hair. These are tiny, tiny
Now, is that a
little.
thick person's hair or is that like a thin person's hair?
That
I'm just trying
honestly, that average I found on the internet, and it's
to know. I'm
probably
just wondering here.
like a tiny. It's probably like blonde, like arm hair,
Just the
super
smallest hair.
thin.
The smallest, thinnest hair, and then 30 times smaller. Okay,
And,
now I
and
got
then
you.
imagine, yes, 30 times smaller than that. And so these tiny little particles, is they exist once they are emitted. For the most part, they linger around. They exist in our background. When you walk out of your house, it is there. When you walk into the park, it is there. It's in the air that we breathe. That you can, every once in a while, when it gets really bad, you can see it. Like, have you ever like looked down the street and on a sunny day and it looks a little hazy? That is what you're looking at. It's the clumps of pollution is what you're looking at.
Yeah, and I mean, it's pretty sad that anyone that like in a community has to know these things. Like that's part of the way we talk to each other and the things that we have to like keep in the back of our mind. That's not normal. Like not every community, not every community has to know that. Like I saw these air monitors you can literally buy on Amazon or whatever, and they tell you how much PM2 is in the air. Why do we need these things?
And that's what Rio actually even mentioned. Like, we don't have the money to buy extra sensors, to buy extra particles, purifiers just for our air. And so it's really like goes back to who is actually being impacted and what are the harms.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, so like basically, we are able to tell that prolonged exposure to PM 2.5 is how we get asthma, how we get chronic heart issues, heart attacks, premature death, and just like overall lung disease. And I mean, things that we see, unfortunately, in super high numbers in the community. And it's not an accident. It's nothing we don't know. And not something that our government doesn't know either. It's very well documented, unfortunately.
That's the worst part about, like, that's why it's so important to note that these are tiny little particles, because they get into your bloodstream, they get into your lungs, and they stay there. That's like you said, that's why we have things like asthma and things like that. And you know, there is things that are happening in our community through our local governments to kind of fight some of this pollution, to reduce emissions in our community. That's one of the big things. Not only pollution, but contact exposure to that pollution. Things like, very briefly, I'll touch on Rule 65, which was essentially a rule that the Air District passed, limiting the Chevron refineries' ability to pollute in a certain way, that is actually like a very common rule for air districts around the state to have. So Chevron, like, immediately after this passed, like, completely shut it down, sued the life out of the air district.
Absolutely. And I just also want to note that this is from the Bay Area Air Quality Management. And so there were 3 refineries that were actually going to need to be retrofitted to make sure that they were limiting the amount of PM2 in the air. And PBF Refinery and Martinez were one of the first also to sue BAAQMD, the Bay Area Air Quality Management District Board. So not only did this management group were sued by Chevron, they were sued by other refineries. And I also wanted to touch on something that Alfredo mentioned. This has been proven for years, like around the globe, to make significant change. This is not something like a pilot program. Maybe it's gonna work, no mas. Like, let's see. No. This had been proven. There was so much evidence, but yet the corporate power wanted to show their strength, their money, and go after hundreds of people that called. I was one of the callers that waited 8 hours to just get like a 2-minute comment in around why it was important for future generations in Richmond to make sure that we limit the amount of PM2 for our overall health.
Yeah, and I just want to say Chevron's putting all this money into suing BAAQMD when they literally could put that money towards making their operations safer, cleaner.
Hello. Let's go there.
I mean, I've never personally had to hire a lawyer, but I can't imagine they're very affordable. Yeah, I just like, that's something to consider. And also, I just want to note that if anyone ever has an experience where you're smelling anything weird in the air, I'm going to go ahead and put the number to BAAQMD in the description so you can go ahead and call.
Yes, it's a very easy number to remember. It's a little hotline, literally 1-800-334-odor. That's all you need to remember. Whenever you hear something, whenever you smell something, you see some smoke, something that doesn't feel right, please go ahead and call them.
And I think that is, it again talks to what we talked about in episode 2 of our end episode 1 around our community's need to respond constantly. And our community's need, as we are the first responders. This is literally how we respond. We smell something, we see something, we immediately give the number out, we help each other out and make sure that we are safe. And so I'm interested to listen to Minerva talk about the harms of living next to refineries.
Environmental racism, this is what plays a huge role in where refineries and factories like this are placed. They're placed here for a reason, because these are the people that the system doesn't care about. And these are people that they want to leave behind, which would be like BIPOC, Black, Indigenous people of color, and poor people also.
You know, this concept that Minerva brings up, environmental racism, we hear this all the time, but I feel like it's not always clear to people what we talk about when we talk about environmental racism, what that means. It's essentially how Minerva puts it, the idea that there are Black, Indigenous communities of color suffer, you know, disproportionately the effects of air pollution and climate change than white and wealthy communities elsewhere. You know, it's not by accident that, you know, North Richmond and the refinery are right next to each other, that, you know, we are in between highways.
Yeah. So districts 1, 2, 3, 5 are predominantly communities of color. And we're going to actually listen to Dr. Milstein. If you've heard some of our other episodes, you've already heard from her, but she's going to be talking about how fossil fuels affect our health as a community. So let's give it a listen.
Fossil fuels are deadly. Mm-hmm. We, for a long, you know, they're the thing that makes it in some ways more complicated, but also in some ways much more straightforward, is that they are bad for our health in the here and now, and they are bad for our health in the long term, in the sense that, you know, combustion of fossil fuels is the primary driver of climate change, which is an existential threat to all of our health, regardless of whether we live in a refinery community or a community where there's oil and gas drilling or not. This is, you know, we are all facing an existential threat to our health as a result of climate change. The health impacts of all of the processes involved in getting these fossil, you know, in drilling for and refining these fossil fuels and burning these fossil fuels are also very, very real. And the reality is those health impacts, the vast majority of those health impacts have been borne by marginalized communities that have been affected by systemic racism, redlining. You know, it is by no accident that the communities that have borne the brunt of these health impacts are communities that have been, you know, chronically underserved, and underfunded and underinvested in.
Yeah, and I want to touch on one thing that Amanda said, which is systematic racism. For people or anyone who may have not heard of this before, it's the way that our institutions in this country write racism into their existence, into the way that they operate. It is the way that they work discriminately based on race. And we see it in so many places: criminal justice system, employment, housing, healthcare, education, political representation.
Yes.
Yeah, and so, you know, we're going to hear a little bit more about that, Alfred.
Yeah, like it really goes to show, you know, like we've talked about in previous episodes, a lot of these problems that we have are legacies of policies like redlining, legacies of race, of policies that our own governments put in place, rooted in racism, rooted in xenophobia,
Yes.
of fear of Black and brown people for no fucking reason, you know, of you know, the want for us to not live and exist and work on equal planes. And you know, one of the people that we talked to was this woman named Lydia, who talked about this experience that she had at a city council meeting where Chevron was there talking about an incident that they had, or giving an explanation for something, and they kind of just ditched last minute. Let's hear from Lydia.
You know, the council meeting that they had 2 council meetings ago, I called in because Chevron was there to report on the flares, and they did a piss poor job of whatever the hell they did. And
Yeah.
I was so mad I couldn't even speak. I told them that they're garbage basically. And one of the people who was supposed to kind of like talk about, I think, the actual effects of that flaring, ended up having to leave the meeting before their presentation because he had to go do something about some scouting event with his son. And one of my comments was, you know, just how he's worried, concerned about his son's scouting, you know, future. We're concerned about our family's health and future. Like, will we even have a future? Like, you have asthma?
Thank you, Lydia. Again, coming always with just straight truth from her firsthand lived experience. And I want to touch on a couple of things here. The lack of accountability that she is speaking to and the lack of transparency that she's speaking to is something that we feel constantly. Yet we are held to be accountable for our own health, our own insurance, for living and breathing, for walking, and yet they can kill us slowly. They can kill us slowly and simply get away with it because of corporate greed. And when is there going to be a time that we as a community are able to shape the quality of our own life? When are we going to bring the power back to the community so we do not constantly have corporate power and corporate greed, which is something that Lydia had talked about in another meeting around this? And I think I want to point out that we've been doing it, and we can do it, and we have the tools and the skills and the knowledge and the experiences and the fucking power. And so we can door knock, we can canvas, we can text think, we can do direct action outside of Chevron. We can just take back this city. There is one Chevron, and there is 110,000 people here in our city, voices. And that's what the whole project is about. It's us and how we constantly fight back.
And like to come back to that point of fighting back, I love seeing and saying that it's happening. You know, our community is mobilizing. We are pissed the hell off about this. There is like one thing that we want to bring in these podcasts is show the community that there's so many different ways of getting involved, you know, not only to highlight the problems, but to show that we're fighting back, you know. through there, there's various different organizations that we can join. We've highlighted some like Communities for a Better Environment here. We've highlighted Urban Tilt, but there's so many different like working groups on Chevron. There's No Coal in Richmond, and these are all community members. Youth versus Apocalypse, that are mobilizing people to not only call out against Chevron, but actually get some things passed, and we're doing this. This is work that is coming from the community, and there's so many opportunities to get involved with this. Like another thing going on through the Air District is the local community emissions reduction plan. That is part of the state's AB 617 law that was passed recently, putting money into communities to work with air districts to reduce pollution in ways that take account community concerns. It's
Go
not
on,
just
Chair. Alfredo's not gassing himself up enough, or their self up, excuse me. And I will definitely shout out Alfredo and so many other young people that are on that steering committee that are putting other folks on game and making sure that they are being compensated for those meetings, making sure that the community is being listened to, and that there are different voices representing our community.
So we interviewed so many people, and right now we're going to share from two really powerful women, Yvonne and Tracy, share their stories about how they think our community should be moving forward.
We have to, really take our health into our own hands. Like, we can't rely on anyone. And I would say not just health, but also like other issues, like we really have to engage our community in empowering ourselves to resolve our issues, because we're the only ones that really know how to do that.
Or at least motivate us to say, okay, what can we do as Richmond residents to get this message on that we are not okay with that. We are not okay with not having clean air to breathe. We are not okay with having these random fires all the time and blow-ups and not being told the truth about what really is going on and the adverse effect it's having on our health, our spiritual health, our mental health, our emotional, and all the others, physically. I think there has to be a point as residents where we say no more.
Yep. And I think Richmond is saying no more. And that's why we're here doing the work, doing this environmental justice work. And I realize we haven't even defined environmental justice. So yeah, I mean, it's, putting power back into communities that have been overlooked, that are most harmed, and looking environmental racism in the face and fixing it. And that's why we're here, giving the power back to the people, giving power back to the community. And just like Tracy, no more.
No more. No more. That's what this work is about addressing these things and putting power back into our communities, really.
Absolutely. And I also just want to recognize our community has always had the power. I think that we are just simply becoming a vessel to amplify our community's power. Our community has it. Everybody has it in their own hands. And just like when people say, I'm here to speak for the voiceless, no, everyone has a voice. They just speak in different ways. And so I think that we can see, and I've always seen my life here in Richmond, and my parents, my grandparents here in Richmond, and they're the original environmental justice folks. Mm-hmm. They're the folks that are constantly saving Earth every fucking day from like our million butter containers that are filled with spaghetti and pozole and everything else. You don't know what you're going to get in there. We're the ones that are like, Mia, take the bag so you don't have to bring another one home. And there's just so much of that everyday environmental justice, that activism that we do when we activate our mind and say, this is better for the planet. Like, we naturally bike, we walk, sometimes because we're forced to, but a lot of times because that's a choice that we can make. And I think that we have been fighting climate crisis for a very, very long time in so many different ways. And we're the originals. We're the original environmental justice activists.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And as we close out this episode, I just want to say thanks again for everyone listening. Make sure to come back next week, Monday morning. We're dropping Asthma Club, which is kind of all about growing up in Richmond and how asthma affects the community. And we're going to hear some really great stories. So make sure you tune in to that. And as always, we're ending on a positive message to the community. So go ahead and listen up.
The words of encouragement that I would have to offer, number one, is nobody can do this alone, but together as a community, I think we can, and already have made a big difference. I mean, Richmond is an amazing place that has a long tradition of community powered change. And I think this is yet another example of that. And I find a great deal of hope in being in community and knowing what's going on. And I would encourage anyone to find that, to look for that community and to join it.
Love you, Richmond. Pride and purpose. And salute, man. Stay up.
And I know I ain't the hottest, but I promise Rich City I got us. Believe me, I got you. You got me, I got you. You got me, I got you. Hey, Rich City, I'll never let you go. You don't know that I love you, Rich. You don't know that I love you, Rich. Rich City.
Thanks for tuning in to the Listening Project podcast. A special thanks to the Richmond Progressive Alliance for making this podcast possible. The RPA's goal is to take power back from corporations and put it into the hands of the people. To learn more, visit their website at richmondprogressivealliance.net. Thanks so much.